Hello, and welcome to Parallel Music on Pasadena Media. Today's panel discussion is part of a weekend of music, information, and entertainment. I'm happy to be here today to host a panel discussion with three mid-career music professionals with varied careers and varied backgrounds. They've studied at the University of California, Juilliard School of Music, the Berklee School of Music, and the San Francisco Conservatory. Please help me welcome, in order, Alejandro Lazo, Suzanne Lukather, and Dave Goldstein. So, Alejandro, would you please give us a little background on yourself and how you got to this point in your music career?
Definitely. Hi, everybody. I am originally from Mexico, and I came to the United States to pursue my career classically trained. I play classical and flamenco guitar and my own works as well. I did a master's at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music and then a doctorate at the University of Arizona. And my passion is to play music that's recently written, and so contemporary classical music, and my own works as well. I play duos, solos, trios with orchestra, and also a lot of bands, types of ensembles. And I've been teaching music for many years too. I'm passionate about teaching kids. I teach at Walden School here in Pasadena for many years, and I run the music program there.
Great, thank you. Suzanne?
Hello. I was born and reared here in Southern California, but I went to the East Coast to begin my career, which started out on Broadway and wound up being off-Broadway tours, Disney for 16 years, association, several startup projects with them, and then also the cruise industry. And now I am back here based in Southern California, and I have a studio, the Lukather Singer Studio. We're very active. I'm passionate about teaching as well. I think it's wonderful to have a career to base your teaching on because you really are speaking from experience. And I'm very delighted to be here this afternoon.
Great, thank you. Dave?
Sure, thank you, Mark, for having me. I'm also delighted to be here, and it's always nice to have a chance to discuss sort of the nuts and bolts topic of the music business. As you and I were discussing backstage, I think sometimes the media perpetuates a lot of sort of stereotypes about the business that are a little bit far from the truth. I have been here in Southern California for the last 20 years, working as a freelance keyboard player and producer. I have a BA in music performance from the Berklee College of Music in Boston. I'm originally from upstate New York. And I work as a keyboard player backing various touring acts, and I have a recording studio. I work producing various recordings, both for songwriters and singers, and I've done some work scoring for film and television, and I've also been a private music instructor for the past 20 years.
Great. So that's really all the topics we're going to talk about today, so each of you has a slightly different take on the same subject, so we should have a very interesting discussion. Cool. Our first topic, the music business from your perspective, getting started. We hear stories about artist manager, business manager, booking agent, all of that sort of thing. If you're actually going to think seriously about making a living making music, after you've met the foundation of being an excellent musician and performer, what do you do next?
We were talking about the fact that when I was younger, I used to enjoy reading a lot of biographies of various musicians. And when I look back on that now, I think it was not because I was necessarily so interested in their lives and in their careers as it was because I was looking for a path for myself. And what I discovered after a while is that unlike in other industries, for instance, if you want to be an attorney, you go to undergraduate school, you go to law school, you start at a firm in a lesser position, and there's a career path there. But in the music business, there is no definite career path. I think if there were, more people would be successful at it. So after you've been at it, what you realize is you have to sort of make your own path.
I'm totally in agreement with that. And there are people in the business who are big stars who say exactly the same thing. You have to make your own path. I think an education is important. I know people want to get out there sometimes and do their thing immediately, but you really do benefit by having an education, as it's lovely to be sitting with all of you folks who've done the same thing. And then you do have to make your own way. And it's a creative process. It's lovely to read how other people have done it, but you have to think for yourself for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that about the creative process, and that it's very unique to each individual. And I think most certainly now, with all the options that we have at our hands to either publicize, to get our music out, and how it is easy in a way to start being noticed through YouTube, through other places, or websites and so on. And I think it requires a lot of creativity. That's true.
Okay. So, in thinking about getting recognized, it seems to me that practically the easiest way is to win a competition, and then you're immediately popular. And I know, Alejandro, you won a prize in 1996, a first prize, at the San Francisco Music Conservatory. Did you find that winning that prize opened doors for you in terms of starting to book performances?
I think it does help, and there are people who actually go through that route, especially in the classical realm, and they start really early, and their parents are really kind of pushing their kids to be great at moving their fingers and being very fluent on their instrument. And there are people who, at least from my experience and what I've seen, who have had great awards and competition, and you never heard from them again. Whereas, so some people who have, and then they're still there as well. I think it's a great way to put a foot out there or open a door or several doors, but not necessarily something that will, okay, now you're done, or you've won this competition, and then it's open for you.
So it wasn't automatic?
It wasn't automatic. There are other things, for instance, at least here for me, I came here with a Fulbright scholarship, which it seems to be very recognized here, so that opened a lot of doors for me, at least in academia. And I would say more so than the actual competition.
Okay.
But the competition did open a lot of doors as well. So it does. I think it's like we were saying, it applies. It's so open and varied, and so many possibilities to get to different places. That's one of them. Yes.
I found that scholarship helped me. I was on scholarship at the Aspen Music Festival for a couple of seasons, and that is lovely because everybody from the East Coast who teaches there and goes there, you're really networking into the world at a professional level, which is very helpful in you gaining the perspective and scope of what you're actually involved in. So I think scholarship is probably helpful as well.
Great.
As to the value of a formal music education, a lot of people wonder, should I attend a conservatory? Should I attend a school like Berkeley? Or am I focused on jazz and popular music? What is the value of that? And I think there are people that are very successful that don't take that route. I think there are people that are successful that go ahead and get that formal music education. And I think there are people that get that formal music education that don't ever pursue careers in the music field. So it can work any number of ways, but I think what is important, whether you do it in a formal way or an informal way, is to equip yourself with some job skills. And I also think there's a distinction to be made between winning a classical contest and being a Fulbright scholarship versus some of the reality shows that you see on TV, American Idol, The Voice. And I think those perpetuate, as I was starting to say before, a myth of the music business that it's very easy to sort of jump up off your couch and become a pop star. And it's not. It takes a lot of work, and it's not any easier to jump off your couch and become a pop star than it is to jump up off your couch and become an attorney. And so I think it's easy to miss that sometimes and find out what is really required. And what is required is some job skills, either being a musician that can play to the level where people will actually pay you for it, being a singer, people will pay you. And I think there's a big difference between enjoying music and being good at it and having a skill that people will actually pay you money for.
Right. So after you've determined that you do have this skill, or it is determined that you do have the skill, it seems to me that there's a level of focus that you all bring to the table that says, I'm a serious person, I can be counted to show up, and I can be, point me to the cue and I can perform. That's the performance piece. How about the business piece? Taking care of, the money that it is going to take to sustain your life. Most people work a 9 to 5, and then if they're going to do music, they do it on the weekends or evenings. But your 9 to 5 is the music.
I
Talk
have to
that.
speak up here because I so passionately believe that if you're going to be a professional musician, that's what you do 9 to 5. And you find ways to make that work. And the idea that you can work a full-time job and then come home at night or on the weekends work on your music, that may work as you're developing or as a stopgap measure if you're having a slow time. Say you don't have a contract in the offing and you've got a couple of months and you really have to do something, okay. But I think you have to be committed in your thought to 9 to 5, I'm a musician, and take every day you take your steps in that direction. Now, it may lead you in a way that's unexpected, but if you are keeping that major point in your thought, then you're following a path. It's your own creative path. And I know this because I've been through that. I've been times when I had to go out and get a 9 to 5 to pay the rent, but it was just for the period of time I needed until I actually was able to secure another contract. And as you get involved in your work, you realize that as you're in a contract, you're preparing for the next contract. As you're sitting there and you have a little free time, you're making a phone call, you're contacting, you're keeping those things alive. And today it's much easier because you have Facebook, you have social media to keep those contacts going. For when I was coming up, I had to send out postcards. I had to have promotional material prepared. That cost money. I had to have it mailed. I had a mailing list. That's another thing. It's a great tip. If you're performing, put a little 5x3 card container on the edge of your platform where you're performing and ask people to sign it and put their email address, because your mailing address is your fan base. So I'm getting off topic here, but
Well, you're talking about the issue of networking.
yes,
And
that's true.
networking is always valuable in anything that we're doing, but
It's the most
probably
valuable.
more so when you're always looking for your next job.
Yeah, I've heard it said that the quality of your work will be in direct proportion to the quality of the relationships with people in the music business that you have, and I think that's very true. And I also agree with what Susanna was saying, that I think sometimes we've probably all had the experience of someone that sees you performing on stage for an hour and a half and they say to you, oh, isn't that great? You work for an hour and a half a day and you go home. What do you do the rest of the time? And I think people really don't know what you do the rest of the time. And speaking for myself, actually getting myself to the performances, performing, getting the equipment to the performances, getting the equipment home performances, that's maybe, I would say, a third of what I do. A third of it would be networking activities. And there's a very significant amount of time that I spend learning new material. And when you're acquiring an education, the faster that you can teach yourself to learn new material, the more money you will ultimately make. Because no one's ever going to really pay you to do that for practicing individually and learning. For instance, one of the act that I work with shows, that's not something I'm going to make money doing. So in a dollars and cents way, the faster I can do that, the more money I'm making.
Okay. So you're telling me that the 10,000 hours that you spend just to get to be proficient, nobody's going to pay you for?
Right. That just gets you to the point where you're proficient, and no one's going to pay you that. And even after you've completed the time to get proficient, you're not done. There's more than the 10,000 hours, because each individual piece that you want to learn, each individual performer that you're going to work with will have their own music that has to be learned. And so there's
Right.
always time that's going to be spent doing that.
I just want to add one extra thing, too. When I was coming up, you had to produce demos, and that was video and then editing and audio going into the studio. Now it's a little easier because you have a flip camera or you have your phone and you actually can, just record yourself and post it. But any promotional, anything you spend on promotion, someone said to me when I produced my first video demo, which was very expensive and costly, that my first job would pay for it. And it did. It's the truth. Anything you actually invest in for your career that costs money, whether it's promotional, anything like that, will always pay off in the end.
And it's tax deductible most of the
Yes,
time.
that's true.
Alejandro?
I was going to comment with the original question about the stages of like what happens when or how to start. And to me, it's not a precise division. Like there's no moment like, okay, now I'm going to work to the moment, and now I know I am at that point where I can start promoting myself. I think they go hand by hand. And for instance, as I was studying or doing my degrees, I was always, I saw people who like waiting for the end to start to feel secure and to start performing. And somehow I just felt, no, I just have to do it now. It doesn't matter, because you look in the past and there were no degrees, there were no, and like David was saying, I mean, some people are in the academia, some people aren't. I mean, my favorite guitarist, he never learned how to read music, and he was, I mean, the best flamenco player you could ever think about, no? In the world or in a decade or any.
Lots of solo time in a room somewhere,
Of course.
figuring out the
Yeah.
fingering.
Yeah,
And
his parents put him like, you know, since he was like a child to practice, but he didn't have a education as we know it in music. But so I think that also in whatever genre you're in music, there's always moments where you're learning, but you can still, I mean, start playing and start getting, of course, maybe the gigs that you get at the beginning aren't that great in terms of money-wise, but you're playing and you're getting your name out and you're getting your, you know, I would play for weddings, for all sorts of events. For you know, one time I played for somebody who was just divorced, and that was a party. And, okay, you know, they want guitar, and sometimes for people who are deceased, and so there's a great variety of events that you can perform at, or venues, you know, bars, restaurants, or concert venues, or small.
so you're
small
looking for
societies.
any place that
Any
might be an
place that you
opportunity
perform.
to demonstrate your ability and to have people give money to you.
Yeah.
Put it in your hand. Now, Suzanne brought up the word contract. And I'd like for you all to talk about contracts a bit, because sometimes they have bad connotations because people sign abusive contracts, and other times they can actually protect you because they're outlining what your responsibilities are and what the quid pro quo is. So would you each take a turn at addressing the contract issue?
I think a good contract clarifies for both parties their expectations. If you don't have a contract, and you have a verbal contract with somebody, it's very easy to come back later and misinterpret what you thought your perception of what you were going to get paid was, for instance, or the other way around. Sometimes even having things in email is better than having them verbally. In communications with band leaders, for instance, if somebody is clarifying that they're available on a certain date, better to have that at least in an email, if not in a contract, so that, you know, there's no misunderstanding and it's at least been written down someplace. We were talking a moment ago about shows like American Idol. From what I understand, the contracts that the participants are forced to sign for those types of shows are pretty onerous in terms of the fact that should they win or should they be pretty successful, their performances, their likeness, any future recordings will be owned by the entity that produces the show. And a lot of times people don't realize that going in. And that's why somebody will be the winner of that show. They'll be the biggest thing in the world for a little while, and then you won't hear about them because they may be contractually prevented from pursuing other opportunities that may come up as a result.
Oh, so maybe we should be looking at the fine print when a contract is proffered?
or someone that representing you, preferably an attorney that understands these things better than you do, should be looking at it and explaining it to you.
Okay.
Not always easy for the layperson or the newer musician to understand.
Yes, ma'am.
I second everything he's saying, and actually, when I have a conversation with somebody, I will actually say, can you email me what the discussion was and outline these points, so that you have that in an email. It used to be faxing, and I used to always say, okay, if you can fax me that information, then we can see on paper what's entailed and what's expected and what the terms of the contract are. And that was always very helpful, because I've had that experience where, oh, I thought you meant this. No, well, what did you mean, and what is it that's, and you don't want to be in that situation ever, really. And it's pretty easy to avert that if you have something in writing.
Get it in writing, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I mean, getting in writing and getting some type of support by somebody who knows about the business, because it's very easy that you're starting, and it sounds pretty exciting many times what they're offering you. It's a new thing, but you really have to look into the fine print, because many times even if it's not only verbal, but there's like this contract, and you don't understand all the details of the wordings and the way things are explained. Plus, it's still, to this day, there are gaps that, they're easy to interpret one way or the other. But much better if there's a contract with it, and so that you're clear. But especially if you have somebody like legal support that you can, or find other people who know about it.
So there is a value to have someone who's been around the block before, sort of looking at the contract from your standpoint, from your side of the table, to protect you from someone who may want to say, well, this is a commodity. We can exploit this commodity, but we may want to take all the money or most of the money.
The contract's generally going to favor the person that wrote the contract.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to get at. It's going to favor the person who wrote the contract. So young artists have to be wary of that, because they've spent all this time getting themselves ready. They see the glamour, but the reality may be not so pretty.
I know when I was first looking at things like that, I was a little afraid to ask questions, and I've learned through experience to ask every question. And a lot of times when you'll say to someone, well, why was it like that? They'll say, well, you didn't ask us. Well, you mean I could have had more money, or I could have had this addendum to the contract that would have provided for this, that, and the other? Well, yes, but you never asked.
Okay, so a word to the wise. Let's move on from ugly old contracts to the glamour of touring. Yes, that was a joke.
Oh,
The
yeah.
glamour. I'd like each of you to talk a little bit about the joys of touring and what that means in terms of supporting a career.
Well, there is some glamour to it, definitely, and especially to me, the actual moment of performance, it just becomes a moment of itself, magic, where magic occurs. So if I look at it in that perspective, and traveling around, but there is all this nitty-gritty that you have to take care of, and all the details that sometimes can be burdensome. And best when you've arranged everything, and once you're already a little settled and everything, they're sending you this and they're organizing for you, rather than you doing everything from start. Because at the beginning you're a performer, and you're a composer, and then you're a manager, you're you're a business manager, artist manager, and then contacting here, all the logistics, all the details about it, and also you're performing. So it can be it can be daunting at first, but once you're in it, I find that it's very joyful to go and share whatever you do with others, especially to that moment where performance occurs, where it's just like, here
When
it
you
is,
create the
and where
magic
was
on
it? I don't know,
stage.
but everybody felt it. His music we understand ourselves, whether you speak the same language or not, whether you speak a different language, but everybody understood that language.
Suzanne?
Stamina. Traveling, particularly if you're touring and you're on the road and traveling internationally. It's really an experience for me when I realized that when I'm traveling in another country, the same laws don't apply. If you're traveling on a ship, the same laws don't apply. You're not coming from a comfort zone, and you are dependent on other people who are governed by other circumstances. And I just want to add one other thing to that, and that is if you're traveling and you are your own manager and you are your own producer, you get into a situation where you may have to rehearse, have business meetings, rehearse with the technical staff, have a rehearsal with a band, then wait until all the performances in that particular venue are done for the evening and have a technical rehearsal, and then do your show. So it really is a matter of stamina, I think. And if you're on some rotational schedule where you're doing that, you have to really be careful about your health, and you have to know the territory. You have to do your homework.
So when do you have time to party if you're going to all these rehearsals and arranging for hotel
When I
rooms
travel,
and-
I would go to the hotel and I'd sleep until I had to have a meeting or have a rehearsal or what have you. So
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, touring does require a lot of stamina, and it requires you to be in good shape physically and in good shape musically. I think it's important to make a distinction between various types of touring. There's touring if you're Taylor Swift or if you're the Rolling Stones, and then there's the type of touring if you're a group of guys with a new band touring around the country in a van, opening for other groups that nobody's ever heard of. And it's important to realize that for the newer or even mid-level artists, touring is generally a money-losing proposition, just from the standpoint of transportation, hotels, food on the road, equipment expenses. There's a lot of expenses that people don't think about when they go out to tour for the first time. And unless you're being paid pretty well from each venue, or can route yourself in such a way that the venues are not too far apart from each other, you're going to lose money.
Mm.
Now, you can make money on merchandising, however.
Okay.
So I would always recommend to everybody that they have merchandise to sell at the shows, because that can often be the difference between making money and not.
including CDs.
Including CDs, shirts, yeah.
So that's an issue of income streams. That was also a topic on our list. So in terms of putting things together and having money to sustain the next performance, the next house payment, the next trip to the shrink, what have you. Well, you have people telling you no all the time, right? You have to have somebody who's on your side, right? Tell us about the different income streams that you can use and exploit to build your career and support your career.
I think sometimes people have an unrealistic expectation as to how much money they're going to make in the music industry. I think you see a lot of music videos with rappers with gold chains, living in fancy houses, driving fancy cars, and people don't realize those houses are rented, those cars are rented, and they're surrounded by models that are being paid to be there. So I think it's important to have a realistic idea of exactly how much money you're going to be able to bring in. As far as managing your money, I think it's important to keep your expenses low. This gets into an area of equipment. There is an entire music equipment industry out there that's sort of trying to sell you on the fact that if you just have the right piece of gear, you'll have a great career, and that's rarely the case.
You'll have the sound that people want to buy.
However, like with any tool, it's certainly easier to get the job done with the right tool. So I think it's important to figure out exactly what you do need and what type of equipment is going to make you money and what type of equipment is superfluous. And I see a lot of people that get trapped in that, and that can suck up a lot of money.
Hmm. Speaking of equipment and touring and carting all that stuff around the world, where do you stand on insuring the equipment or making sure that it's available for you for your performances?
I think if you have a significant amount of money tied up in your equipment, it should always be insured if you're depending on it to make money. It's not always inexpensive, but you want your equipment insured not only in your home, but wherever it is. And just a homeowner's policy is not going to do that. You'll need some sort of separate coverage.
Specific coverage.
But they do have policies for business
Right.
equipment, and you can usually, if you have a policy for your car or for homeowners, that will not be that much more expensive to insure it. But boy, you do have to insure everything.
Because you already have a relationship with your insurance
correct.
company.
There are insurance that are focused for musicians, and they're actually, I mean, it's like they were saying, you have to pay, it's an expense, but it's definitely worth it. I mean, from my experience, you definitely have to have insurance on your instruments, because otherwise, especially on your instrument is.
I learned that the hard way.
Yeah,
I think
me too.
most musicians at one point will.
I've
will,
had
unfortunately
very
find
bad
out.
experiences.
Me
Oh, I
too.
want to hear the horror story. We need to bring the unglamour to.
I had a $1,800 mic that I had just gotten, and I was so proud of it, and it was wonderful high-end microphone. First trip I took, I left it in the cab.
Oh,
I got to the venue, they're setting up, we're plugging in, I'm going, where's the bag that has my mic in it? Of course, you can say that might have something to do with the blonde hair of the chick singer, but
Yeah.
no, we would not say
Yeah.
that.
No, and they can break you. You stop for a moment. I was living in Tucson. I left my concert guitar for a moment, and you couldn't see it. But then I came back and it was gone.
Yeah.
And I mean, luckily I did have an insurance by then. But it was. I
And
mean,
the
I couldn't
backup
repay
guitar?
even. But that was not even it for me because I couldn't find that guitar again.
oh,
Yeah.
So it's a very precise. When you find an instrument, it takes so long to really, find one that speaks to you.
Mm.
So that it's to me it's definitely important. But yeah,
Yeah, I've had the experience of walking out to my van to discover that a rock had been thrown through the window and $5,000 worth of keyboards had been stolen out of the van. And I did not have them insured. So you'll learn.
now Mark, go a little bit of another comment that I kept in my mind regards to other venues. I mean, at least in the classical world, academia. I mean, I would say 99% of musicians teach from the bottom to the top. So the most famous, most renowned, and concert musicians, they teach at a university. They have some sort of constant income aside that is flexible enough for them to tour and play. But there are just, I would say, a few that don't.
So most of your income from performing is lumpy? It comes here, it comes there, and you have to figure out how you're going to go from one clump of income to the next clump of income?
Well, it's like anything that has to be with freelancing, It goes the same way with a lawyer in a different way, but you definitely have to learn to manage your income throughout a long span. And so you would have maybe something that's steady, however you can find that to be, and then to some degree to pay your bills, and then from there build up. And then you can maybe start rotating it to being more of a performing and less. Of course, I'm not talking about working at a coffee shop. I'm not saying it's bad or good. But I'm saying if you want to be a performer in music, you really have to, like Susan was saying, devote to it. So it's great to be a coffee worker, but if you want to be a serious performer, you have to be on it for a long time.
That has to be at the top of your
Yeah.
list.
I really wanted to perform. That was my passion, and so I found myself locating and relocating to places where I could perform. And Florida happened to turn out to be a very a balanced place for me because I was able to develop 3 very important relationships with Rank Leisure USA, Disney, and the cruise industry. And with those particular 3, I should say accounts, if you want to call them that, I was able to manage so that I had a constant stream of income, and I was able to really be able to live that dream of being a performer and living and financially able to handle that. And so that's really helpful if I wasn't married, I didn't have a family, I was able to just go to where I felt that I could have that experience. So that's helpful if you're not married and don't have the encumbrances. But that's also another issue entirely, because some people can see that as a sacrifice.
Also, Los Angeles is a city that has many ways. It's been changing because of new media, but there's mediums that we can use. But for a long time, I was able to support myself being a session musician. And a lot of ghostwriter too, composing for people who they don't want to put your name, but you still get paid and your name never goes out, but you composed whatever was needed. Or it was helpful for me to be able to be a very good reader, sight reading musician, because people will say, okay, we want this, can you read this? It's done right now, come in and buy. And so that's very handy. And there used to be a lot of places where recording studios and people who are doing music for the film industry that require that. It's less now because there are already more equipment that you can kind of do to a certain degree the work done without a person, musician in person. But it's still a good way to make a living for a while.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that there's no one big income source. There are lots of little income sources that you cobble together in some kind of crazy quilt of a career. And then you still have to manage your money. You still have to manage your insurance. Tell me about the decision to do that on your own versus having a business manager.
I think it depends who the business manager is. You have to remember that, first of all, no one is going to take more interest in your own career than you are. So I think sometimes people have a vision in their head that some Svengali is going to come along and sort of manage their career into big things without any effort on their part. They're just going to sort of do the music and be the artistic person and not have to put any effort into the business side of things. And that's rarely true. Many times a manager won't become interested in you until you're at the point when you don't need them anymore, which is kind of ironic. When people feel that they can make money off you in some way, then they'll become interested. But as an emerging artist, you're going to really pretty much want to make that happen yourself.
Okay. So that speaks to record company contracts then, because record companies used to develop talent. And I think there's a sense that now you have to get yourself to the point that you have a critical mass before they're even interested in you. So you have to take on the role of agent and business manager and booking manager and artist manager and all that.
I think people sometimes have an older business model in their head which no longer exists and in some way never did. And again, sometimes you see this in the movies where there's a band playing in nightclubs and some scout from a record company sees them and signs them to a big record deal, and they make a lot of money and their problems are over. It never happens that way. The whole function of a record company has changed now that people no longer really buy recorded music, and that's a whole other issue.
So one of those income streams has shriveled up.
It sure has, in a big way, in a big way. However, there are other opportunities, and as we're talking about different types of income streams, we were talking before about music education, and I think when you're getting your music education, sometimes it's hard to know what the income streams will be later on in your career. I went to Berkeley and studied a lot of big band arranging, which was great. I enjoyed it, and I don't think it was a waste, but it's not a useful job skill for most people anymore. A lot of the useful job skills now in terms of using Pro Tools or other music software didn't exist much at that time. So you're going to have to be flexible over the course of your career into learning new skills and doing new things.
Right. Now you mentioned computer software that assists in your work. Does that really take the place of having the information inside your head? I mean, if you know the way music fits together and sequences and scales and all that, you think about the totality of the music. That computer software may assist you in doing it faster, but someone who hasn't studied it can't just say, oh, I'm going to put that note on that page and that.
Well, unfortunately now with some of the software that it exists, it is pretty easy to get some music going by throwing a couple of pre-recorded audio segments together and to get something that sounds halfway decent. But like with any tool, the software only is as good as your ability to get the music out of your head into the computer. And it's just another tool. And I don't know that it's any more or less valid than using any other instrument. There are a lot of people now doing music that don't have traditional instrumental skills, you know, in the way that we've all developed them. But they do have knowledge as producers, and they're able to make a good living doing it. Is that better? Is that worse? Is that more or less valid? I don't have the answer to that, but that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
There's
Okay.
another element to it, too. As I was working and traveling, I had to pay an arranger to create the score, and it was always done by hand. And then I had to pay a copyist to copy the arrangement for the band. Now, with software, Sibelius and all those, you can call up somebody. I could call you up, David. I could say, can I have this arrangement of this tune in this key? And he'll do it all, and then he'll PDF it to me, and then it's done.
That's right.
That process costs probably 1/10 of what that other process costs, which
Right.
was the old way. And so for the performer who doesn't actually have those skills but relies on having that as part of as an element in their work, it's been a huge benefit.
That's a good
Great.
thing.
Yes.
That's a
Well,
very
I
good
think
thing.
we're going to have to stop there. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for participating in our panel today. And what I'd like for you to do is just give us a brief little closing remark and make sure you enter or include your contact information, because I'm sure people will be interested in following up with each of you after today's discussion. And let's start there on the end with Alejandro.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a great pleasure and a very interesting subject. It was great to discuss with you as well. People could find my information on my website is Lazo, which is my last name, Lazo, LazoGuitar as one word.com.
LazoGuitar.com. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
And I'm Suzanne Lukather, and it's been a pleasure being with you folks today, and very informative as well. And you can reach me at SuzanneLukather@mac.com.
And remind people that Suzanne is with a Z, S-U-Z.
It is SUZANNE.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Mark. This has been very interesting, and I'd like to thank Suzanne and Alejandro. It's been a very interesting discussion. For more information about me, you can check out my website, which is www.davegoldsteinmusic.com. Goldstein spelled Goldstein.
Great. This has been Parallel Music at Pasadena Media. I'd like to thank our guests, Alejandro Lazo, Suzanne Lukather, and Dave Goldstein for joining us today for a conversation about their participation in the music business. I want to remind everybody that they are mid-career professionals making a living, so their opinions are valid and they're worth actual money. I'd like to thank our director today, Demario Ray, for having us. It's been a pleasure being here. If you'd like more information about Parallel Music, you can go to parallelmusic.com, or you can hashtag Parallel Music. Once again, this has been Parallel Music at Pasadena Media. Thank you.